wondering if the Sun Realm it indeed exists, and if so, where it is located in the game. What you are about to see is a pre video I will be releasing about the Sun Realm. I have decided to give you a taste of what you will discover in the full video, which I plan to release in 2 weeks. So, please don't forget to click the notification icon to receive updates about my video releases. And with that said, thank you for supporting my channel and enjoy the video. Our journey kicks off in a small cave northeast of the Scorched Ruins in the Land of Shadow. Inside the cave, we stumble upon a painting known as the Sacred Tower Painting. This artwork showcases the entire Elden bathed in yellow glow, reminiscent of the sun's radiance. This glow is also similar to the golden light we see from the Erd tree. Naturally, the next step is to travel to the location depicted in the painting. Upon arrival, there seems to be no trace of the golden glow as shown in the painting. However, as we move towards the Divine Gate, where we face Miquella and his promised consort Radahn, some intriguing patterns start to appear. These patterns are subtle and easy to overlook, but they are crucial to our quest. In the expansive area filled with monks, where we battle Needle Knight Leda and her warriors who support Miquella, there is a white circular object right in the center of the arena. A close inspection of this object reveals what appears to be the reflection of the sun, seemingly trying to eclipse the white object at the center of the arena. Although you might be tempted to dismiss this pattern as a simple architectural design, I encourage you to reconsider and join me as we explore the origins of this light source. If we move up towards the ceiling of the arena and observe, we can catch a glimpse of an intriguing pattern. But what if we start from the top of the roof and descend into the arena? Let's see what we can uncover. Lo and behold, we find an interesting pattern reminiscent of a sundial, or more specifically, a vertical declining sundial. In simple terms, a sundial is a device that shows the time of the day by the shadow of an object exposed to the sun. Think of the sundial as your modern day clock or watch. It seems that someone or a group of people were interested in the position of the sun. The pattern in the center of the arena suggests that the reflection of the sun intersecting completely with the white circular object might be significant to whoever designed it. It is not immediately clear to me who is responsible for the design of the sundial or the pattern in the center of the arena, but I suspect the monks situated there might have something to do with it. I would love to hear your thoughts about who might have created the sundial and the pattern in the center of the arena and for what purpose. So, please share your thoughts in the comments below, and while you are at it, don't forget to subscribe and like this video to help with the YouTube algorithm. But does the evidence we have uncovered so far imply that any Elden is the Sun Realm or the city once crowned by the sun? Or perhaps the Sun Realm is just a metaphor for past kingdoms or rulers and their cities. Well, not so fast. There's more to this narrative, which spans across the Divine Gate, Castle Sol, Param Azula, and even a little bit of From Software's upcoming RPG, Elden Ring, Ninth Ring. And all will be revealed in the longer video, which will be hitting your screens in 2 weeks. So, stay tuned and don't forget to praise the sun. Long ago, in a land across the fog, laid a city crowned by the sun. This city has faded away, with hints of its existence only depicted on the shields wielded by those who live in death. But has this city completely disappeared? Or are there remnants of it lingering somewhere in the lands between? Welcome to the longer version of our video about the Sun Realm. I want to thank all of you for making the shorter video, which happened to be this channel's first video, a success. And for those of you who might be worried about criticizing my videos, here is a quote to encourage you not to shy away from criticizing my work. Now, let's get the exploration underway. Elden Ring's DLC, Shadow of the Earth Tree, as you would imagine, has a strong shadow theme. There is even a specific location in the game called the Shadow Keep, located south of the Skadu or Shadow Tree. What's more intriguing is the architectural design at the Shadow Keep's main gate. Just above the decapitated statue of Marika are shapes that closely resemble those found on the shield depicting the Sun Realm. Things become even more interesting when we position our camera to catch a glimpse of the pointed arrow shapes on the wall and the tower behind them. I must admit, the sun is nowhere to be seen at the Shadow Keep's main gate. However, this could be because the Shadow Tree, or the veil Marika placed over the land of shadow, is blocking the sun and its rays from reaching the Shadow Keep. The only thing that left me scratching my head was why we do not see the entrance depicted on the shield. Upon careful inspection of the area, one would notice debris on the ground. This left me thinking whether the Shadow Keep's main gate area might have undergone some architectural changes. The debris close to Marika's statue might have come from the fractured wall behind the statue. But what about the others lying some distance away from the statue? Those couldn't have come from the location I mentioned earlier, nor do they appear to come from the top of the area. Could it be that there was an entrance right where Marika's statue is located, but that entrance was sealed when Marika's statue was positioned there? Well, the Shadow Keep is not the only location in the Land of Shadow worth investigating. How about any Elden? Our adventure in any Elden begins in a small cave northeast of the scorched ruins. Inside this cave, we discover a painting called the Sacred Tower painting. This artwork depicts the entire NALM basking in a yellow radiance reminiscent of the sun's glow. This radiance is also similar to the golden glow we see from the Earth tree. Naturally, the most logic step is to travel to the location depicted on the painting. Upon arrival, there seemed to be no sign of the golden radiance as shown in the painting. However, as we progress towards the divine gate, where we confront Michaela and his promised consort Rodan, some intriguing patterns begin to emerge. These patterns are subtle and easy to miss, but they might hold the key to our quest. In the large area with many monks, where we fight Lady Knight Leda and her company of warriors who support Michaela, there is a white circular object right in the center of the arena. A closer look at this object shows what appears to be the reflection of the sun, seemingly trying to eclipse the white object at the center of the arena. Although you might be tempted to ignore this pattern and mistake it for a simple architectural design, I encourage you to reconsider. It appears someone or a group of people were interested in the position of the sun. The pattern in the center of the arena suggests that the reflection of the sun intersecting completely with the white circle might be significant to whoever designed it. It is not immediately clear who is responsible for the design or the pattern in the center of the arena, but I suspect the monks and the Honsens might have something to do with it. I would love to hear your thoughts about who might have created the pattern in the center of the arena and for what purpose. So, please share your thoughts in the comments below. You might think that's all, right? Well, there's more. Just past the arena, up the stairs is the divine gate. Observe how the two towers flanking the entrance of the boss arena, where we can access the divine gate, are reminiscent of the two towers we find on the Sun Realm shield, albeit without the pointed arrow patterns and the larger tower. Another talented content creator, Scum Mage Infa, recently released a video showing how a portion of Limgrave Castle resembles the Divine Gate. His video even shows the sun aligning perfectly between two tower-shaped figures, like the Divine Gate. I encourage you to visit his channel and watch that video. It's mind-blowing. Anyway, if we lift our camera slightly above the entrance to catch a glimpse of the Divine Gate, the scene seems to depict the Divine Gate as the seat of an object that could potentially be the sun. What's more, there are several footages from the boss cutscene that seem to show the radiance of the sun directly from the Divine Gate. Take a look. It's also intriguing that From Software recently showcased a game called Elden Ring Ninth Reign. which features a scene with the sun towering over a castle engulfed in shadow. While Night Rain might be a separate game from Elden Ring, we also see elements of Elden Ring in the trailer. So, why depict the sun and shadow in the same location? We know the Shadow Realm in the DLC of the Elden Ring base game has a shadow theme, and I have provided evidence suggesting the Hunsent who reside in the Shadow Realm were concerned with the sun. Could Night Rain be providing us with some clues about the Sun Realm? Anyway, I digress, but let's get back to our main narrative. So, does all the evidence I have provided so far imply that Shadowkeep or Elden is the Sun Realm? Well, don't forget there are other potential locations associated with the sun. For instance, there is Farum Azula, which is always sunny, and Castle Sol. Limgrave is also a potential candidate, but as I mentioned earlier, I believe Scum Mage Infa did a pretty good job with that location in his video. So, how about we explore Farum Azula and Castle Sol? Then, we can draw final conclusions about our findings. The first thing that might catch your attention about the weather in Farum Azula is that it has the same seemingly sunny atmosphere everywhere, irrespective of the time of the day, be it morning, afternoon, or night. It's always illuminated. Another interesting observation I made recently is that the sun is always approximately east every time in Farum Azula. I have tested this observation at different times of the day in Farum Azula, and the result is always the same. You must be wondering how I arrived at that conclusion. Well, I conducted a simple experiment. First, I checked the position of my character's shadow on the ground while in Farum Azula. Once I noticed the position of the shadow, I checked the direction of my player from the map of the game. I repeated this process at different times of the day and locations in Farum Azula, thinking the position of the sun would vary. However, in all cases, my player cast a westward shadow. For my player to cast a westward shadow, the sun must be in the east. You can learn more about the sun and shadow from the link I have shared in the description below. Interestingly, in our real world, the sun always rises in the east and sets in the west. Farum Azula is also currently located in the most eastern parts of the land between. I say currently because it's possible Farum Azula wasn't always in its current location, given that we find remnants of debris from a so-called temple that was once in the sky scattered across the lands between. Maybe the temple in the sky was a part of Farum Azula. While continuing my investigations about the sun in Farum Azula, I came across a large dragon who, interestingly, has lost a significant chunk of its health. But what's more intriguing is that this dragon appears to be resting on a pattern found in Queen Marika's chamber in the royal capital and the grand lifts of Rold. There also seem to be several hawks in close proximity to the dragon's location. After keenly observing the environment around this dragon, I noticed that the dragon seems to be in the line of the sun's rays. Notice that this dragon is situated next to the arena where we lock horns with Marika's shadow-bound Malekith. But I have no clue what that could mean. So, I would love to hear your theory about the possible connotations of my observations. And while you are at it, please don't forget to subscribe and like this video to help with the YouTube algorithm. But before we move to the next location, I want to draw your attention to some compelling links and similarities between Farum Azula and some locations in the Land of Shadow. First, Farum Azula, the Belurat area, and Enialim boasts red and golden or yellow colors, especially on top of the roofs. There are even patterns common to both Malekith's boss arena and the Belurat goal, which comprises multiple large circles and 4 smaller circles distributed in 4 positions around the larger circles. In fact, this pattern is reminiscent of the fire giant Sigil. Additionally, the horn-sent grandam invokes the spirit of a horned beast from a higher celestial sphere to inhabit the lifeless remains of the sculpted keepers.
O horn-decked beast from higher sphere delivered, take root inside the tower sculpted keepers.
Could this higher celestial sphere be Farum Azula? After all, Farum Azula seemed to be spherical in shape and home to beasts with horns like the dragons. We also have the spiral patterns that the horn-sent seem to revere. These patterns are reminiscent of the storms we find in Farum Azula. How about the fact that Bale the dragon fought Placidusax and retreated to the Land of Shadow? Why the Land of Shadow of all places? Could it be that the battle between Bale and Placidusax took place in Farum Azula, which was then directly above or in close proximity to the Land of Shadow? If this is the case, then it is plausible that Bale retreated after the battle with Placidusax by descending directly below Farum Azula into the Land of Shadow. I am currently working on a video that explores the original map of the Lands Between, where I will delve deeper into the connections between Farum Azula, the Land of Shadow, and the Lands Between as we know them from the base game. So, please don't forget to click the notification bell to receive updates once that video is out. Our next location on the list is Castle Sol, or the Castle Sun, since Sol means sun. One would expect to find the castle basking in the golden rays of the sun. Additionally, the 2 ghostly characters located in this castle appear to be interested in an eclipse. There is also a floral pattern on one of the rooftops of the castle. This pattern can be found in some locations in Farum Azula and the Farum Bridge in Caelid. More intriguing is the fact that the floral pattern has a central circle surrounded by 8 smaller circles. This depiction reminds me of the lunar phases, which illustrate the moon's orbit around the Earth. The lunar phases are often depicted as a central circle surrounded by 8 other circles. Notice that the location of the moon relative to the Earth determines the type of eclipse we observe. Specifically, when the moon is between the sun and the Earth, we witness a solar eclipse. Conversely, a lunar eclipse occurs when the Earth is positioned between the moon and the sun, giving rise to a full moon. Another intriguing aspect of the phases of the moon is that a hexagon or 8-sided figure is formed by joining all the moon phases with lines. I mention this because hexagons and the figure 8 or 8-sided figures seem to feature prominently across various designs in the game. Here are a few examples. I digress, but I just couldn't help but notice these intriguing patterns and wanted to share them with you. Anyway, back to Castle Sol. After investigating the environmental details of Castle Sol, the only thing that stood out to me is that the moon seems to be in stasis above the castle. There is no sun in sight at the castle, irrespective of the time of the day. So, perhaps it's the seat of the moon, not the sun. Originally, the absence of the sun at Castle Sol was an enigma to me. I mean, the castle is literally named after the sun. But upon careful consideration and brainstorming, I think it makes sense that we do not find the sun here. Let me explain. First, the ghost in the church in Castle Sol refers to the sun of Castle Sol as frigid, which translates to very cold in temperature. Well, I don't know about you, but the sun sure isn't cold to me. At least, the moon seems to be associated with cold, which is something Rani references during his speech about the age of stars.
Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond.
Furthermore, the castle is literally in the north of the lands between, covered by snow. You see, in our real world, the north is mostly cold and covered by snow due to the limited amount of sunlight it receives all year round. So, one wouldn't associate the northern areas of the lands between with the sun. The absence of the sun at Castle Sol gives me the impression that it was never a place crowned by the sun. At most, I would consider it a place crowned by the moon. The Shadow Keep and any Elden seem to have some compelling evidence that could support them being the realm of the sun. After all, both locations reside in a realm of shadow, and a shadow is created when a solid object is placed in the path of a light source like the sun. So, it is plausible that before becoming the Shadow Realm, the Land of Shadow received an abundant supply of the sun's rays or energy. However, Marika's Air Tree was placed in the path of the sun, thus receiving the sun's energy and only casting a shadow over the Shadow Realm, robbing it of the sun's abundant rays. The Shadow Tree, in this context, would be the resulting shadow the Earth Tree cast on the Shadow Realm. Of course, this is in a metaphorical sense of an eclipse, which could be what the game is alluding to in reference to shadow. Oh yes, and how about the Dung Eater, a notorious figure who wears a sun medallion around his neck and is adorned with the Omen armor, which has its horns cut off. We know there is a strong link between the horn scent and horns, so perhaps the very home of the horn scent was the Sun Realm. The Horned Warrior in the service of Michaela refers to the Skadu tree or the Shadow tree as the misshapen tree of Umbra.
Go to the misshapen tree of Umbra. In that forsaken place, blood must spill.
Umbra is a term often associated with the darkest region of an eclipse, so he might be metaphorically referring to the eclipse involving the Earth Tree, the Shadow Realm, and the Shadow Tree. If my hypothesis is correct, then Marika literally created an eclipse by placing the Earth Tree between the sun's path and the Land of Shadow. Additionally, the painting of the Sacred Tower seemed to depict NALM as a location receiving an abundance of sun rays. And above all, the sun ray and the white circular object located in the arena full of monks in close proximity to the divine gates, which seem to be shaped as though its upper section is ready to receive a circular object such as the sun, adds to the evidence of a sun theme in the Land of Shadow. While the sun is not visible in Farum Azula, I have demonstrated that the sun is always in the east, irrespective of the time of the day. So, it's logical to conclude that the sun is stationary in Farum Azula. However, as mentioned earlier, it is never seen physically in Farum Azula. We do find floral patterns similar to those in Castle Sol here in Farum Azula. So, there is a strong indication that Farum Azula was associated with the sun and moon, or even an eclipse. Then, we have the fact that Farum Azula and the Land of Shadow boast skeleton enemies wielding the Shadow Realm shield. All this evidence leads to three theories about the potential location of the Sun Realm. The first theory is that the Sun Realm was a city in the Land of Shadow, specifically around the Shadow Keep and its environs. This theory is supported by the architectural design found around the main gate of the Shadow Keep and its close proximity to the Shadow Tree, which appears to block the sun and its rays. You might think the Shadow Keep is too small for a city, But don't forget it could include the church district area, as both locations share the same color theme. The second theory is that the Sun realm is Farum Azula, given that the sun is literally static and the location is always sunny. This theory holds some weight. Furthermore, the Old Lord's Talisman refers to Farum Azula as an ancient royal city. Additionally, the Sun Realm city has faded away, and Farum Azula appears to be lost to time and slowly crumbling. The only wrinkle in this theory is that it doesn't account for the architectural depiction of the Sun Realm shield. However, one could argue that parts of Farum Azula's architecture have crumbled. Thus, our inability to catch a glimpse of the city depicted on the Sun Realm shield. The third theory relies heavily on speculation, but I still think it's worth sharing. The Sun Realm shield is described as a shield of honor, meaning it was given to its wielders in recognition of some service or act. It's important to note that the game doesn't specify where the shield came from. All we know is that the shield is a shield of honor and depicts the Sun Realm, which has long faded away. It is therefore safe to say that perhaps there was once a Sun Realm with a ruler or king or queen and an army, since the wielders of the shield appear to be warriors of some sort. This realm likely honored their dead warriors, especially those who distinguished themselves in battle with the Sun Realm shield. However, this city is long gone, and the ritual of honoring distinguished dead warriors continues from one seat of power to another. In effect, the Sun Realm has been wiped away from the lands between, and what remains is just a ritualistic remembrance of it. Which of the three theories do you subscribe to? Before I let you go, there is an aspect of the sun and the Sun Realm that couldn't fit into the overarching narrative we've explored so far. So, I might make another video, perhaps a sequel, to explore the angle of the lore about the sun. This would focus on why the sun seems to be present in the lands between and the land of shadow, yet the sunflowers in these locations point towards the earth tree in the lands between and the shadow tree in the land of shadow. So stay tuned because I have more content coming your way.
Prior to reaching the top of Jagged Peak, the Tarnished are likely to hear tales of a great beast that rests upon the top of this mountain. Whether it be by talisman or survivor, one hears a name so unforgettable, so fearsome that makes climbing the mountain even more terrifying. You hear of Bale the Dread, the great dragon terror and progenitor of Drakekind. The name of Bale the Dread sends chills through the hearts of even the most battle-hardened Drake warriors, a being that even the ancient dragons fear, a beast whose legacy is etched in both blood and betrayal, a phantom that has cast a long shadow in the annals of Farum Azula. He fills a gap in the lore that we have long sensed but perhaps not been able to put our finger on. With his arrival, a lot more of the lore of the dragons fits into place. Questions that surround dragon communion and the ancient dragon cult, how dragons take human form, and who dealt the wounds on Placidosac's body. All of it now makes sense, and yet for all that's said, there are still some interesting details regarding the dragons that need to be ironed out, with some new mysteries, details and stories to be unpacked regarding Elden Ring's dragons. So in this lore video, we will be unpacking the lore of Bale, Dragon Communion, and the Ancient Dragons. Remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel, as I have hours of lore content for you to enjoy. But before we climb Jagged Peak, we need to take communion with today's sponsor, HelloFresh. HelloFresh is a product I have been using myself for a year or so, and they now have more choices than ever, with 50 plus dinner options and even more market items that suit any healthy lifestyle. There are 30 plus calorie smart and protein smart recipes each week that are delivered straight to your door, pre-portioned for your convenience. You will never be struggling for choice, and HelloFresh allows you to customize your selection every week, with their easy-to-use website and subscription model. As the seasons change, so do the seasonal menus, meaning that HelloFresh keeps the menu vibrant, your choices endless. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, and HelloFresh agrees, and so they're giving all subscribers free breakfast for life, giving you one free breakfast item per box as long as your subscription is active. HelloFresh are currently offering Smowtown viewers a great deal by offering 10 free meals and that free breakfast for life. Click the link in the description or use my code and get 10 free meals plus free breakfast for life, one breakfast item per box while subscription is active if you're in the US. Outside the US, the local discount will apply. Thanks again to HelloFresh for sponsoring this video, and now back to the dragons. I think a good place to start this video is talking about Bale's betrayal, and how his actions split the dragon brood in two. I would still recommend my Ancient Dragons video if you want a discussion on their civilization, their role as the first custodians of the Elden Ring, and their relationship with the Beastmen. However, I want to keep this video more or less laser focused on the DLC related lore. However, in that video I was close to being right about the existence of Bale. I related Placidosax to Tiamat, a goddess in Mesopotamian mythology who is associated with the primordial chaos of creation, and in Dungeons & Dragons, she has been transformed into the god of dragons, a five-headed beast that very much resembles Placidosax. In trying to guess who wounded Placidosax, I suggested that perhaps we could find the answer in Tiamat's myth, who herself warred upon her own children, and thus I suggested that one of Placidosax's children wounded him, i.e. another dragon, one of his brood. I went further, putting forth the idea that Gransax was perhaps the culprit, which is why he is the leader of those who attack Leyndell, after he had seized power for himself. As it turns out, it was indeed a dragon who turned upon Placidosax, Bale the Dread, a name so reviled now by the Ancient Dragons. Florisax, an ancient dragon in human form, recounts these events to us, as she says the following.
In a time long past, Bale turned upon the Dragon Lord. The foul traitor assailed our master and inflicted a grievous wound, only to make a hasty retreat, becoming a sworn enemy of the brood.
Lots of interesting details to unpack here, and I first want to start with Florisax's use of the word traitor, which means that Bale once belonged to the ancient dragon brood. Given the word traitor means someone who has betrayed a cause, or group, and in this case a species. Bale must have lived amongst the ancient dragons, and to me Bale is an evolutionary crossroads between the ancient dragons and those who would become his brood, the modern drakes. Florisax gives us some more interesting details regarding Bale and his descendants, as she says,
Now, seek the jagged peak. There you will find Bale, the oldest and vilest of all dragons. Since that day, Bale and his bloodline, the Drakes, have served as sacrifices for dragon communion.
Bale is the oldest of the Drakes, and they are his bloodline, and again I therefore believe that Bale was essentially counted among the ancient dragons, whilst also representing something new, and every Drake that followed would claim Bale as their ancestor, with each generation moving further and further away from their ancient dragon ancestors, until they become something else altogether, more animalistic and lacking the Gravelstone scales of immortality. Yet as I've said, Bale himself is half and half between an ancient dragon and a Drake, in an evolutionary sense, and I believe he would have been considered as an ancient dragon by his kin. It's just that he is the start of a new evolutionary divergence. He is able to wield lightning, a power we associate with ancient dragons, not usually with his modern dragon descendants. Indeed, reinforcing the fact that it is ancient dragons who wield the red lightning is the description of red Fulgurbloom, which reads, "Found at the jagged peak on the south coast, said to bloom where the red lightning of the ancient dragons strikes the earth." This is no mere passing skill as well, for Bale's mastery of the lightning is only exceeded by the likes of Placidusax or Fortisax. A wounded Bale is able to use his mastery over lightning to produce lightning wings that act as a sort of prosthetic to his ruined wings. My reason for believing that these fake wings are a sort of lightning incantation is twofold. Firstly, because when Bale starts his second phase, he unleashes a powerful wave of lightning and magma. Secondly, because this is not the first example of lightning being used to fashion a solid object. Placidusax himself does this when he fashions a spear out of lightning before his nuclear attack. That being said, while red lightning is the power of the ancient dragons, and we don't see any drakes wielding this power in the lands between, it seems as though Bale was able to pass on this ability to some of his closest kin who still reside with him at Jagged Peak, albeit they cannot wield it to nearly the same degree as the ancient dragons or Bale. As Vati points out in his video on Bale, these specific Jagged Peak drakes also drop the item called Dragon Scale Flesh, which states it grows on aged dragons specifically. I concur with Vati's conclusion on this, that this means these drakes are likely some of the oldest drake in existence, thus maybe a bit closer to ancient dragons genetically, and able to use the red lightning to some degree. So while Bale is a proto-drake, he still retains a lot of the features of the ancient dragons, showing exactly where he sits in the evolutionary scale. He is simultaneously an ancient dragon and the father of a new subspecies. Indeed, when he led his rebellion, it would have been other ancient dragons that joined him. There would have been few drakes at this stage, for he would father the majority of this entire race. The fact he is joined by traitor ancient dragons is confirmed by the item description of the Red Lightning Pot, which reads the following: "The ancient dragons who betrayed their lord to side with a tyrant were known for wielding branching red lightning." This would explain the presence of the likes of ancient dragon Senisax, who is found guarding the upper reaches of Bale's domain. This was an ancient dragon civil war, a split between the two most powerful of their kind. It is definitely easy to think of Bale as a drake, but he himself is actually closer to an ancient dragon, despite him being the father of what we know as modern drakes. In fact, Bale's unique evolutionary features could be the reason he is so immensely powerful and dangerous. He possesses the lightning affinity of the ancients, yet also possesses the predatory instincts and animalistic strength of the modern drakes. This in-between stage between dragon and drake is also something we see in Dark Souls, in the shape of Seath the Scaleless, and indeed this was a large focus of my Dark Souls lore video from last year. In this video I referenced Loki's Abyssal Archive, in which he argues that it was the coming of the First Flame that changed the ancient dragons, and led to them becoming less mineral and more living, until you were left with the drakes. In between this evolutionary scale, you would have dragons who would have been born among the ancient dragons, but afflicted with life. Archdragons like Seath, who would struggle with his mortality and state of being his entire life. Bale, to me, is in a similar position to Seath, the first proto-drake, still one of the ancient dragons, but also the beginning of something else. He has lost the front legs and gravelstone scales of the ancient dragons, and yet he still wields the lightning. If this is the case and it follows a similar evolutionary chart to Dark Souls, then is there something analogous to the First Flame? Well, it is possible there isn't, and Bale is just a new stage in evolution that happened over many, many generations. However, it is possible something did affect the dragons in order to cause an evolutionary split. The Crucible. I would like to credit content creator Scum Mage Infa, from whom I first heard this theory. Infa does excellent videos and I would highly recommend their channel. In the relevant video, Mage Infa made some really thought-provoking arguments regarding the nature of what a crucible is, and again I would recommend you watch that video in full as it goes into a lot of detail. However, what is of relevance for this video is the suggestion that Bale is essentially a dragon who has been crucible touched, pointing out his horns and the horns and feathers of the Drake kin. To be clear and to not misrepresent Mage Infa's video, his idea of what a crucible is far different from my own. The main idea that I am taking from his video is that the crucible may have affected Bale and is the cause of his evolutionary divergence. Taking this further, I think there is merit to the idea that the crucible spawned a sort of devolved sub-race of dragon, for if we read the description of the various crucible talismans, like the feather talisman, the word devolution is specifically mentioned, implying the crucible causes devolution. Additionally, the crucible is often associated with bestial violence, and the drakes are certainly a more beast-like subspecies, with Bale himself being no exception, the avatar of violence and destruction that he is. Thus is it not possible that the emergence of the crucible caused a segment of the dragon species to devolve from the highly refined ancient dragons, starting with Bale. If so, this would make it analogous to Dark Souls, with the emergence of the Crucible's power affecting the dragon species. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Either way, an aberration among his kind, Bale would emerge, and his magnificent strength would draw ancient dragons to his side, who would join him in rebellion. But why did Bale rebel in the first place, you might wonder? Well, I believe the answer lies in the item description of some key item descriptions, like Bale's tyranny, which reads the following: even after being consumed, the throbbing heart of Bale continues to resist its subjugation, never weakening. A couple of things to note here. First is that it is in Bale's nature to resist subjugation, and I believe he therefore resented Placidosac's rule over him. I also think it is in his nature to be violent, aggressive, and thus it was in his nature to challenge the current alpha for supremacy. The Talisman of Dread reads the following: Bale was the foul dragon's name, a terrible harbinger of destruction whose challenge to the ancient dragon lord ended in grievous mutual injury. As we learn from the likes of Fortisax and Landsax, the ancient dragons were capable of being civilized, hence they were able to commune with humans, and they of course built a great civilization. The ancient dragons represent the ordered, intelligent, and civilized aspect of the dragon. Bale, in contrast, is the bestial aspect of the dragon, a predator whose instinct is not to build, but to destroy, and thus he would have chafed in their society and under Placidosac's rule. This innate vicious nature of Bale's is reinforced by Florisax's commentary, who makes a comparison between Egon and Bale.
I remember that name well. The broken Drake warrior, driven by bottomless hunger and fiery ambition. Precisely what the Dragon Lord envisaged for men who partake in dragon communion. The mad hunger and fierceness of spirit that only flows from those young and short of sight. He rather reminds me of Bale, in fact.
Additionally, we may get further insight into Bale's true destructive nature by his affinity to magma and fire. The Talisman of Dread enhances magma, and additionally it says the following: Talisman depicting the dread dragon of the Jagged Peak, whose roars cause the peak's molten fury to boil and churn. Bale's roars literally affect the environment around him. the volcanic mountain he is perched upon, subject to his moods and influence. Bale is a force of nature, a manifestation of destruction and primal bestial fury. Bale is not a civilized creature, he is one of violence, and thus, he was always bound to rage against Placidusax and his order. To really dig into this point, Placidusax was Elden Lord, consort to a god who bore the Elden Ring. He is a lord and force of order. As I argued in my prior dragons video, despite the typical depiction of dragons as harbingers of destruction, the ancient dragons are actually beings more associated with order and civilization. Conversely, Bale is a force of disorder, and if Mage Infa is correct in suggesting Bale is a being affected by the Crucible, then it is fitting he acts as a force of violence, given the Crucible is more closely associated with chaos, violence, and beasts. Bale is referred to as a tyrant in multiple different sources, and as such I believe Bale also wanted power for himself. He saw himself as stronger than Placidusax. Bale has such a vicious reputation, I cannot help but wonder if he committed acts of terror before he even challenged Placidusax, perhaps taking to the skies and hunting lesser life forms, thus earning his reputation as a harbinger of destruction. Either way, Bale would bring ancient dragons to his cause, and a civil war would ensue, with the two mightiest dragons locked in a combat, which must have been quite the sight, as they must have been almost godlike in terms of power, two titans tearing into one another, and causing massive mutual injury that essentially results in the slow decline of Bale's faction and dragon civilization as a whole. Placidusax's wounds were terrible. Bale tore off a number of his heads, which still seem plastered to Bale's body as if they are trophies, their jaws still locked around the tyrant's throat. He additionally caused great wounds to the Dragon Lord's hide, revealing his golden flesh underneath. However, Placidusax gave as good as he got, completely shredding the tyrant's black wings and severing one of his legs, and as such, Bale was forced to retreat, crashing down onto Jagged Peak, never to return to Farum Azula. Once settled here, Bale would warp the landscape around him, his roar causing the volcano to roil and bleed. His affinity for the lightning would wreathe the peak in an endless storm, and where his red lightning struck, red fulgur bloom would grow. He would be feared in the surrounding lands, a natural disaster with malicious intent, and with him his brood would grow. From Jagged Peak his kin would go out into the world, that would continue his legacy of violence. So there are two main things we need to discuss following this cataclysmic battle: the actions of Placidusax in the aftermath, and we of course need to talk about the birth of the modern dragon race. I would like to start with the latter, to keep Bale as the focus for now. Let's start with the location of Jagged Peak, and how it relates to the propagation of the Drake race. Reflecting on what I said earlier about Bale representing disorder, Jagged Peak is an excellent home for these predators. As a volcano, it is a natural representation of violence and disorder. No wonder Bale has an affinity for magma. Conversely, Placidusax represents order, and remains seated in the throne of a sophisticated city-state. This divide makes this evolutionary crossroad even more significant, with both species parting thematically as well as literally. The ancient dragons cling to their crumbling civilization, and the drakes devolve into territorial predators. We see this strong territorial behaviour in most of the modern dragons we face, like Egil, who descends upon us from above as soon as we encroach on his nest. There were of course the ice dragons who laid claim to the mountaintops before the giants drove them off, but they never again were builders of civilizations. They take after their ancestor, beings of violence and predation rather than of order. Their physical form of course lends themselves to this type of lifestyle. They no longer have the forearms that the ancient dragons have that would lend themselves to building, etc. Their form is more like that of a bird of prey, which is unsurprising given who their ancestor is. That is not to say that they are entirely unintelligent, non-sentient beasts, as we do get examples of drakes acting in an intelligent manner. For example, we have Adula who swore an oath to Rani, as well as the other Glintstone dragons who swore an oath to Ranala. Additionally, we have Decaying Ixaix, who is known as the Dragon Communion Revenger, meaning he purposefully hunted down Dragon Communion warriors, and this is a purposeful, conscious act. I earlier mentioned that it was unlikely that many, if any drakes, existed at the time Bale rebelled, given drakes seemed to be almost entirely of his bloodline. It is of course possible that all surviving drakes are of his line, and that there were drakes contemporary to Bale who were killed in the Civil War, thereby leaving all surviving drakes as his bloodline only. Additionally, he may have begun to propagate his bloodline while still a member of Ancient Dragon Society, but I do believe the majority of drakes will have come into existence after his exile. However, as I said earlier, Bale is an evolutionary bridge between the drakes and the Ancient Dragons, and I think that Bale first took Ancient Dragons to be his mate, and eventually the resulting offspring would give rise to the modern dragons, as the Ancient Dragon genes were eventually bred out. Specifically, we learn that Greol is reputedly the mother of all modern dragons, as Greol's roar reads the following: Greol was the mother of all dragons, dwarfing all who stood before her, like a looming mountain. Greol is the mother of all modern dragons, meaning she must have mated with Bale at some stage, given all modern dragons seem to be his bloodline. Greol is also significantly larger than most modern dragons, and so here's my suggestion. Greol herself was the offspring of Bale's mating with an ancient dragon, one of his followers who joined him in his betrayal against the Dragon Lord. Then in turn Greol was Bale's mate, and from these two the modern dragon bloodline would flow. I also think Greol's size is perhaps an indication of her proximity to the ancient dragons genetically, given she is one of the first alongside Bale. I would also suggest that the giant drake found near Cerulean Coast could have been one of the oldest drakes, perhaps an early offspring of Greol and Bale. So while I believe that the drakes largely came about following Bale's exile, there is some evidence that larger drakes like Greol and the one at Cerulean Coast did live in Farum Azula. I want to direct your attention to the Dragon Mausoleum in Farum Azula. In this room we can see a giant dragon skull, and I hadn't given much thought to this skull previously. However, looking at it now, I believe that it is a giant drake skull, as it shares more features with a drake than an ancient dragon. It has the frontal horn of drake kin, and the fins found alongside its jaw are again a classic feature of a drake's physiology. I take this to mean that Bale and Greol had begun to propagate the first of the drakes, who were very large, and that this was even before his battle with the Dragon Lord. Colossal drakes like the owner of this skull and the one found at Cerulean Coast. But how is all this possible if Bale is in the Lands of Shadow, and Greol is found at the Dragon Barrow? Well, you have to remember that the Lands of Shadow were not always separate from the Lands Between, with the shroud that separates them only coming about during Marika's reign. As I have suggested in my Ancient Dragons lore video, I also believe that Farum Azula once sat alongside the Bestial Sanctum, not only because it has similar architecture to Farum Azula, but because it is where Malekith has decided to hide as a member of the Beast Clergy, constituent members of Farum Azula society. Of course, even more obviously we have the Farum Great Bridge, all but confirming that Farum Azula sat here before Placidusax's actions sent it skyward, but more on that later. Likewise, I agree with the map overlay that was done by Gilliam Yeager, and I will link that original Reddit post below. In this overlay, it basically places Jagged Peak right on top, and next to Grail's Dragon Barrow, and I agree with this. Not only from how the placement seems to fit, but also from a lore perspective it works. If Greil is the mother of all modern dragons, and thus Bale's mate, she would need proximity to him. Additionally, Dragon Barrow represents the largest concentration of drakes in the Lands Between. Thus, it does not make sense that this would have once been the hinterlands surrounding Jagged Peak. If I am also right about Farum Azula once being situated on the ground in this location, then I feel this also fits. It makes sense that an injured Bale would crash land and settle in a location near to Farum Azula, given his heavy wounds and need to recover. One final piece of contextual evidence that may point to Farum Azula, Jagged Peak, and Dragon's Barrow all being situated next to each other is the presence of undead beastmen at Jagged Peak. Again, we do have to wonder how these beings would have come to be here, had Jagged Peak not originally rested next to Farum Azula. So to surmise, I believe that Jagged Peak and Farum Azula once lay next to one another, next to the region called Dragon's Barrow, where the Bestial Sanctum and Farum Greatbridge remain as the final earthbound remnants of the dragon's civilization. However, Jagged Peak was eventually dragged into the lands of Shadow, and Farum Azula was sent skyward, and thus only the Sanctum and the bridge remain. One final thing I want to talk about is the malleability and diversity of Drake kind, which is a thing that seems absent from the more uniform ancient dragons. We see this in the vast varieties of modern Drake that we encounter in the lands between. Frost, Rot, and Glintstone dragons, for example. Beings affected by the environment so much that their form and breath attacks are radically different. This doesn't seem to be a slow evolutionary change that happens over generations in response to their environment. Rather, it seems as though the dragons literally absorb elements from their environment, and their body adapts accordingly. The clearest example of this is the glintstone dragons like Smarag and Adu.